I do believe a big disclosure moment is coming. Well, I think we are. Lou Elizondo said we're actually in the disclosure process, and I think he's right. This ongoing process, perhaps all since the 2017 New York Times article and the Tic Tac videos and things like that, that was really the genie let out the bottle. But actually, I can reveal that there's going to be an interview with David Grush that's been recorded specially for, and I don't see how we can go back. You know, people go, well, it's just an intelligence. We're going down the same route as they're going to get the Condon Committee, the equivalent of it, and it'll be closed down. Big difference, social media. Yeah. Big difference, communications. We are on the brink. If the Chuck Schumer proposed legislation goes through, which in the next 2 months that will be. And yes, we know that the intelligence community are kicking back and trying to delay it, but I actually don't think you can stop the snowball running down the hill now.
The following is my conversation with Gary Heseltine. Gary is a retired police detective turned UFO researcher, author, public speaker and UFO magazine editor, running the UFO Truth Magazine. In April 2013, Gary gave testimony on behalf of police officers worldwide about their UFO experiences at the citizens' hearing at the National Press Club in Washington D.C. Gary's work has been so compelling that he has been recognised with the PRG World Disclosure Award in Washington D.C. by Steve Bassett in 2010. Gary has an incredible journey from his own sighting as a teenager to where he is today on the world stage with his work. So, the following is my conversation with Gary Heseltine.
Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
And it's I've been following you. I mean, I've been into the UFO subject for quite a while, and certainly in the UK. And there's not that many so we say people, personalities within the kind of the media in terms of sort of news and online and content. And I know that you're one of those people that's kind of in there, and I've seen your face in so many bits and pieces and your magazine, and I know you've done all sorts. Prior to starting this, I do a bit of an introduction which kind of explains you and your background from research. So what I want to do, if it's okay with you, is first of all kind of jump in and kind of go back a bit to where it all started and what first kind of piqued your interest in the subject.
Yeah, well, that began at the age of 16. I was born in Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire, and I lived in a suburb called Ashby, and I was walking my then girlfriend home. It was an August balmy summer evening, loads of stars out, not a cloud, warm t-shirt weather, which is rare for the UK, even in August. And we're walking along a narrow footpath that was then not lit with electricity. And basically on my left side, there was my comprehensive school, Frederick Gough Comprehensive. And on the right side was a large allotment, a huge big allotment. And there was fences on the allotment side, and then there was a wire fence to the school. And as we're going along, and perhaps at the darkest point, we're like opposite the school fields. In the distance, maybe perhaps another 200, 300 meters in front of us, was a housing estate with all the lights on. So basically, the long, narrow footpath ended up coming out by houses. And we're just walking along. I'm pushing my bicycle at the time, and I see this bright white light, no distinct shape, but much bigger than the background stars, maybe at that kind of angle, 60-degree angle, moving right to left. So literally, as we watch it, with immediately thinking it's a plane or something like that, it goes along, and there's no noise, which is odd. And then as it gets, in a sense, to the 90 degrees and it's passing us, and therefore we're now behind it, what coincidentally happened is as soon as it passed by us, all the housing in the distance, all the power in the housing just went out like a power cut. And that was odd. So that got our attention, rightly or wrongly. My girlfriend, who was called Dawn at the time, she got, oh, what's that? And got a bit frightened. So we're watching. And then it goes further along, very, very slowly, silently, and it's moving in the direction of my home, which was approximately 3/4 of a mile away. And it's moving very slowly. And then there's a second power cut behind the flight path. So you've got, it's like in a scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind at the beginning where he's looking down the city and it goes off grid by grid. Well, it kind of was like that. So it went off twice. And at that point, now I'm thinking that's really weird. I had no interest in UFOs at that time, but I thought this is really weird. And so I said, right, get on the crossbar. I'm going to take you to your house, which was approximately 200 meters to the end of the alleyway and maybe 300 meters to the right along the street. And I literally dropped her off, and her house and the whole area is in darkness. I got back on my bike, rode like mad, went back down the same long alleyway that brought you out onto a main road called Grange Lane South, which then took you in the direction of my home. Everything is in complete darkness. I'm racing like mad, and I can see that the light is ahead of me on my right. So if you can imagine going, it's kind of over there. Now, what was really weird is as Grange Lane South, near to my home, there's a bend where it bends to the left. And I could see in the distance where the bend was. So as I'm racing down this long straight road, basically, I can see that the power is on. So there's this distinct moving from darkness into light, the power's on. So I remember as I go into that bend, I look over my right shoulder, because I'm now into power, and I look, and I've managed to get ahead of the light, which is now slightly behind me, moving slowly and silently, coming in the direction of my home. So it's really weird. So I go around two corners. I go around Westdale Road that led to my road. The first right then was Baysdale Road. I lived at number 3 Baysdale Road. So I drop my bike outside. I rush inside to my parents who are having supper. So I'm assuming it's 9, half 9, something like that. And I said, come outside. I think there's going to be a power cut caused by this strange light. And they just look at me bemused, as you would do. They don't get up. So I just leave them. I run through the hall, into the kitchen, out through the back door, down to the back of my semi-detached garden, turn around at the end of the garden and look back at the house, just in time to see the object now coming over my rooftop at a much higher elevation now, altitude. And to this day, and if you've probably heard me on other radio shows, to this day I can't explain it, but I do this. I put my hand up like I'm answering a question in class to make a 90 degrees. And as soon as the object went past my hand, the whole area is plunged into darkness. Now that's ridiculous. How can I predict a power cut? It's ridiculous. But what I knew was that if I moved to a second geographical location, approximately 3/4 of a mile away, that light, whatever it was, had to have been interacted with the power grid, because it's ridiculous that I could know that there was going to be a power cut. So that's created my interest. Now, that was 1976. Now, the only thing that you could do in 1976 was literally go to a bookshop, second-hand bookshop, and look for anything on flying saucers, UFOs. And that's what I did, because it was just prior to the VHS Betamax era where you started to get cassettes and whatever. So that was the era that it was. I wasn't even on the phone then. This is how long ago. My family weren't on the phone. It was ancient. And so who do you report it to, even if you had it done? So that didn't happen. So basically, all I could do was go to Ashby High Street, which is the suburb where I lived, and I knew of a bookshop. I'd been in before for other things, and I went in this bookshop, and amazingly, I got this book, and Aliens from Space by Major Donald Kehoe, and it turned out that you think of all the thousands of books that have been written over the years. The first book that I got turns out to be someone who I regard as an absolute hero in this, because he'd always been saying for years, pilots were telling him, he was the founder of NICAP in America, which was then a very major organization comprising of military personnel, because he'd been military. And it turns out it was the 5th of his books, his final book of 5. And sure enough, when I got this book, I mean, I always find it amazing that happened to be the first book, because that really was a good book to get. And I'm reading through it, and I learn of what was called the New York blackout in 1965. And it says that UFOs were believed to have caused power cuts across the eastern seaboard, and that for about 6 or 7 hours, people were stuck in lifts underground, trains and lifts and whatever. And they even made a film about it, not about UFOs, but about the blackout, because it was about 8 or 9 million people were affected then. And straight away, I got a validation moment that was something strange, and that's basically what triggered my interest in the subject. I had none prior.
Wow. Do you feel that it sort of changed you in any way? I know it's a bit of a cliche sort of question, but how did it feel?
I remember saying to my parents, see, I was 16 and said, "Look, I told you," and they just said, "No, it's a coincidence." They just didn't entertain it at all, and so much so that, I mean, we used to get the Scunthorpe Evening Telegraph, and they pretty much convinced me there was nothing to it. I don't even remember reading the paper to see if anybody else had reported it. But that's by the by. As I say, we weren't on the phone, but who would I have phoned? I mean, it's not like Ghostbusters. You can ring up and somebody will come running out in a van. So literally, in answer to your question, not at the time, because I didn't get involved in public research until I was 42. So there's one hell of a gap between the age of 16 and 42, by which time what I used to collect books, and then when the era of documentaries came out on VHS, I would look for anything like that. Magazines. I joined BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association, and I did things like that. But I went to one UFO group meeting in Scunthorpe, and they all seemed a bit strange. So I didn't. I only went once. I did some little things like, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this before, but there was a film festival in Scunthorpe. They were opening up a new film theatre, and to launch it, they had a day on a Saturday, and there was actually a photograph of me with several other researchers. One of them being a UK guy called Nigel Watson, who's written several books on UFOs, and I was involved believe it or not, as the host, and I was only 18. Right at the start, opening this up to the audience. I mean, I'd never done any public speaking, but it's really weird. The first section that we had for the day was, I think for the first hour was something like old not video clips, film clips, cine film clips, and basically several film clips had been given to me to show the audience. So I kind of did that, but there is a photograph I still got it, and that was 1978 at the opening of the Scunthorpe Film Theatre. So that's really where I did something. But other than kind of watch from afar, as I say, the one UFO meeting I went, I thought they were a bit strange, so I didn't go back again. I kind of watched it from afar. I then kind of went away and had a life. I had children. I did 6 years in the Royal Air Force Police. And then at the age of 29, I joined the British Transport Police. Obviously, start off as a PC, and then my thing that I was interested in was interviewing. I became a specialist advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. So that was my particular interest, and so I veered towards that, and I became a detective pretty quickly. And as I say, I was in the police for 24 years, the last 19 years as a detective constable, not a high rank, but I didn't want to go high because in reality, once you go above detective sergeant, you pretty much tie behind the desk and you become an admin manager. And that was not really what I wanted. I like the psychology of interviewing people. This kind of environment, I like talking to people, getting out and getting statements. So that's kind of what I focused on and did that. But in reality, what happened was, whilst I got books and whatever, I kind of went through many years, maybe 9 or 10 years, where I didn't do anything. Perhaps in my 30s, other than the odd documentary that won, and there weren't many, I'd watch it with interest. But then what happened was I think it was about 1997, 697, I went into a WH Smith's on Leeds railway station, and just on one of the shelves was a glossy magazine, UFO magazine, which was printed by Quest Publications, and the editor was a guy called Graham Birdsall, who I didn't know at the time. Now, cutting a long story short, I sent him a. What happened was I had a dream, very weird. When I saw the magazine, it was a A4 glossy printed colour magazine, which was vastly different from the 15 or so years earlier, where it had been little tiny, poorly printed, usually home printed kind of little booklets. There was nothing professional about any UFO magazine in the past. And then suddenly I'm looking at this magazine that's alongside any other glossy magazine. And I think, wow, that's interesting. And I think that became a catalyst because it reawakened my interest. And in the 10 or 15 years I'd really not delved into it too much, I came across a lot of newer books that I wasn't aware of. Books like Above Top Secret by Tim Good, Beyond Top Secret by Tim Good, Nick Redford's book, things like that. It kind of reawakened my interest, and I started to follow the magazine every month. It then gone monthly. It had been bi-monthly. It went monthly, and then a strange thing happened. And I'm not one to usually remember dreams at all. I mean, everybody has dreams. I don't say they don't have dreams, but I don't usually remember them. But I remember having a dream where I woke up and I'd never written anything in my life other than school essays. I'd never tried writing or anything as such. And then suddenly I woke up with this idea for a film script about what could cause big D disclosure. And it was like a thriller, a Hollywood thriller. I'd never written a thing. And yet within 6 weeks, it was so vivid, the premise and the characters. Within 6 weeks, I'd written my first film script. I've written 5. All right, feature-length film scripts. And I had no idea of formatting or anything. But anyway, I kind of did it. But the main thing that came from that was I had a premise of a scenario that could trigger a storyline, I guess, that could trigger disclosure, and a very vivid set of characters to get that going. And but I only had the beginning. I didn't have a middle or an end. But by the end of that 6 weeks, I'd done a middle and done an end. So I realized then that I could actually write, albeit I'm a lot better writer now because with practice you get better. But that was the thing that convinced me out of nowhere that I could actually write, that I could create something. And so when I'd done the first draft of the film script, I basically printed it off and showed it to some of my CID colleagues and uniform colleagues, and it kind of went around the police station. Oh, can I have a read? And everybody came back and said, "Oh, it's brilliant! This, oh, real page turner, and it made a great film or great book and whatever." And anyway, it's nice people saying that it's good, but I wanted some kind of validation from somebody within the subject to see if it was any good. And I basically posted a copy, printed off a copy, and sent it along with a covering letter to Graham Birdsall, the editor of UFO magazine. And I, to be honest, I didn't think I'd ever hear anything again. I'm assuming he must have got loads of things like this. But anyway, about 6 weeks later, just out of the blue, one tea time, so I get a phone call, and it's Graham Birdsall, and he goes, "I've read your script, it's brilliant, I'll help you, it's fantastic, I'll do whatever." And he actually, and I still have it to this day, is a cover letter that he sent me endorsing the script and giving it a real good review. And that then, he said, "Why don't you come to my conference," which is held every September at Leeds University usually. And it used to be a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, big international conference. And he was I didn't know this, but he was well established as the main conference organizer in the UK. And he'd have people like Stanton Friedman and other top people from around the world, John Mack, Bud Hopkins. He'd had them all basically to his conferences, and I think it was something like the 18th or 19th consecutive conference he'd had. And he said, "I'll give you some complimentary tickets. Why don't you come down?" And I've never been to a UFO conference at all. And so I went, and there was also an evening awards, and I listened and whatever, and I it basically, I came away from it feeling a sense of frustration that there I was now, maybe 38, 39 years old, and a growing sense of, I want to get involved, but how do I do that? I'm a detective, and time is not your own. If there's a major incident, you work around the clock for days on end until it's basically solved or unsolved. But generally, things work very hard, very quickly for a few days. And I couldn't be one of those people that would be there every Friday or commit to it every Thursday or whatever. It's not, it's the nature of the job. It's not like that. So then over time, I began to think, well, how can I get involved? I want to get involved in research. What can I do to make a difference? And people have often said, write about what you know. Well, I knew police officers. And I was aware through books and magazines of several cases in the UK. Not least the Alan Godfrey case from 1979, which was an excellent case. And I basically thought one day, I'm going to create a database of police officers and start putting it out there that I'm doing this and collate historical accounts and hopefully new accounts. And so I went to Graham Birdsall, and who I'd got to know. So this is maybe 2 years after that initial moment where I wanted, I'd sent him script. It was about 2 years later. I had this idea and said, what do you think? And bear in mind, I'd never had any article ever printed in anything like a professional publication. And I'd sent him this draft article about the creation of the database and some background historical cases and that. And he went, "No, this is great." He says, "You're a credible person." I was a serving detective at the time, an advanced interview. He says, "Yeah, this is great. I'll back you all the way. And yeah, you can print it. We'll print it rather." And so in January 2002 is when I actually go public. And of course, because I was a serving police detective, much to the eyes of the media anyway, you were seen as a more credible person. So I got a lot of media attention, national media. I was interviewed on Look North and things like that, and the national newspapers. And word quickly got round. So when that article came out, I knew I'd done something right, because straight away some retired police officers, not an avalanche, but a couple of police officers contacted me, having seen the magazine, and said, "I've got stories to tell," and it proved that the mechanism would work. If you create the database and put it out there publicly, somebody will come forward, and they did, and literally that then set me on a road where I was doing police work during the day and often taking police reports at night from usually retired officers. And that grew over time. And initially my force, I'd have to tell them that I was doing this, and they were said, "Oh, that's fine, as long as you do it in your own time, it's your hobby, blah blah blah." So they were fine at first, but over time, as I'd become more well known, they then started to impose a lot of restrictions, and it got more and more difficult. They didn't want me to reveal where I was, my collar number, and things like that. So, cutting a long story short, I became well known in the media, and one of the spin-offs from that was that I didn't foresee was that UFO groups around the country said, "Oh, will you come and give us a lecture about your police database?" I'd never even thought about that. And I wasn't a lecturer. I'd never done any public speaking. And other than that thing, very briefly, to introduce that film theatre when I was 18. which kind of said to me that I didn't mind standing in front of the crowd, but that was the only experience I had. And then suddenly I'm being asked to go, to the West Midlands and talk in front of 200 people, and that was weird. But it was something that actually came very easy to me. Most people would run a mile to stand in front of a lot of people, or the press, and either one, I just felt very comfortable in the media and standing in front of people, and I kind of took to it like a duck to water, and that's then how I began to do lectures around the country and get more well known within the subject, and then literally in 2010, I was invited by Steve Bassett, the PRG group, and to a conference in Washington D.C, one of his EXO conferences, and I had no idea what was going to happen, but he then presented me with, on the evening of one of the conferences, on the Saturday night, he presented me with the Disclosure Award, which is very prestigious within the subject, and akin really to the World Disclosure Award within this subject. And like that came, like, it's not very often I'm lost for words, as you probably gathered. But I was pretty much dumbfounded because I had no idea. Nobody tipped me off, nothing. And then my mouth went dry. I'm at the back of the auditorium. And it was held in the National Press Club. They had a dinner in the National Press Club. And where they do all the disclosure movements, and you see green and all that kind of thing. And it was in there. And I'm thinking, who's he talking about? And he kept saying, well, I'm thinking, that's me. And then suddenly, Gary Heseltine, for his work with police officers, and that was absolutely mind blowing. But anyway, the upshot from that was that then elevated me to a much more international status, and since then I've lectured in 22 countries around the world. So it then took it to a different level. You became international rather than just national. And I was at the citizens' hearings in 2013. I was part of a delegation that briefed the Brazilian Senate in 2022, June 2022, which was very prestigious, real honor. So I kind of have been around a while. And in 2021, I was one of the founders of ISA, the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, which is basically scientists, academics, and ufologists basically coming together with national representatives in 30 countries, because we're saying we have to start preparing the world for a different paradigm. And we think it should really be done through education. We have to prepare the people. So we're developing courses to all sectors of society about the history of the subject and different aspects of the subject, because people, I think, are going to be pretty alarmed when they realize that they've been lied to for 75 years. So anyway, that's basically a long answer to your question.
Well, yeah, you've answered my next question really, which was around working within the police and how how your bosses, I guess, and the organisation saw it, because it probably still is. I would suggest it still is a kind of a fringe subject amongst
of course,
a lot of people, and certainly back then. I can imagine more so.
I basically retired early because the pressure on me was growing. And a new chief constable had come into the British Transport Police, and he basically frowned my work, and he made life pretty difficult. Let's say it that way. I am writing a book about it, about my police cases, and it will include a chapter on what happened to me, because it's quite interesting. But suffice to say that my colleagues initially, when I told them, when you're in a group, police officers like a laugh and a giggle and take the mickey out of you, and they certainly did, in a nice way. They knew me. But then when you got them on their own privately, you're out in the car, they'd ask me stuff and say, "Yeah, it's interesting, yeah." But in a group, oh no, it's Gary's a Fruit Loop and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And that's tends to be the way it is. And I think it's probably the same in the military, and I think it's the same probably if you're in any professional walk of life, because over the years, not just police officers have contacted me, People in the military have contacted me, people who run care homes, dentists, and one of the architects, and they're frightened to ever reveal what they've seen because they would lose their careers, which is a real fear. And the biggest reason why people don't come forward across the board is two reasons. One is ridicule. Nobody wants to be ridiculed forever. You're the UFO nut. And two, a perceived fear that their careers that they've worked for will be harmed. And it's a very real fear. And I remember right at the start, when I first said to my colleagues, my detective sergeant, I won't reveal his surname, but I'll call him Alex at the time. He said, I don't think this is going to be very good for your career, Gary. You want to think carefully about it. And I said, look, you play golf. I said, do I tell you what to do in your spare time? And he just kind of looked at me, but it was really, he was giving me the heads up that there would be problems down the line. And he was right. But that's their ignorance because of the stigma that had been created. But I'm glad I did what I did. But when I retired early in 2013, I literally moved from one career into another because I launched UFO Truth Magazine, a bi-monthly e-zine that goes all around the world in PDF format, 96 pages, and it features many of the top researchers in the world. So I went literally from something that I enjoyed, but was then being hampered slightly because the UFO passion was now taking over. I really wanted to be doing it kind of full time. And then suddenly there was an opportunity with my RAF pension years service, those 6 years, and my existing transport police pension. It didn't work out quite the same in terms of years, but I had 27 years in the 30-year police fund. So I decided to retire early and then create UFO Truth Magazine. And so I'm one of the very few people to have actually done it professionally and do it professionally because there's no money in the subject, but I eke out with my police pension, I eke out a living that allows me to do what I'm passionate about. So I find myself extremely lucky to have led the life that I have. But I mean, it's been a weird and wonderful life, and I've been all over the world, on many continents, and I've got some fantastic places where I've been to. And probably the highlight for me would have been in Moscow, which was as part of the creation of ISA. I attended a conference in 2018, organized by the Russians and the Chinese. How bizarre is that? But yeah, to go from someone of my age and era of the Cold War, and having been in the military, to go to Moscow and Red Square was like out of this world. And Moscow is a beautiful city, very statuesque, fantastic architecture and whatever. Everything's on a grand scale, and Red Square is superb. So I've been extremely lucky, we haven't talked about Rendlesham, but I've been involved in a lot of things, and I'm very lucky that I've been able to do something I'm passionate about, and that's what people always say about me. You can see the passion on my face, and I love the subject, and that's why, in a sense, like even today, we've got Congress people in the skiff as we speak. I don't think they've come out yet, but they're in the skiff going through the alleged David Rush testimony, which I believe is real, and it will be interesting to see what comes out, if anything. But yeah, it's been an extraordinary life, but one I would have never have envisaged, but one I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, what an incredible journey. I mean, to go from that, so 16, you say.
Yeah, a little old guy from Scunthorpe. My dad was a welder. I had no kind of professional, nobody. I've written a book now on Rendlesham, and people are giving it great reviews and things like that. And it's like, well, it's just extraordinary what's happened. So I count myself very lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps we'll get on to Rendlesham shortly, if that's okay. But I just wanted to first kind of jump into, something that interests me, and it's having somebody that's from the UK. I'm interested in your take on this, and when I look at the content in the UK around UFO, it's almost non-existent around UFOs. It's very difficult to find. There is some, but just a simple Google search of UFO UAP, it's 99% stuff in the USA. Some bits and pieces on the local papers and stuff. And I just wonder, what do you think? Why do you think it's much bigger in the US and much smaller in the UK?
I think that the primary reason is that America historically, if you accept the premise that Roswell is real, and in 1947 they did recover a UFO, which I believe they did, and probably bodies, which I do believe they did, and they probably did try to reverse engineer it, which I'm sure they did. Then they became the most powerful nation on the earth, because they got hold of this technology. Whether they could make it work, I think, is a totally different thing. But then America really became the lead on it, and they created the stigma through the Robertson panel in January 1953, which was conclusion, used the media to debunk it, and it worked incredibly well. And people have died, committed suicide because they've been ridiculed, lost their jobs, and a very terrible legacy that will all come out in due course, when I do believe a big disclosure moment is coming. Well, I think we are. Lou Elizondo said we're actually in the disclosure process, and I think he's right. This ongoing process, perhaps since the 2017 New York Times article and the Tic Tac videos and things like that, that was really the genie let out the bottle. So in a sense, America has always controlled the subject. Britain, because of its close ally with America, has always followed its lead. Basically, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand followed its lead. So perhaps 2/3 of the globe followed America's lead. Historically, if you look back in the 1950s and 60s, there were most towns had big UFO clubs. And believe it or not, for UFO meetings, sometimes big auditoriums with 1,000, 2,000 people will be there, and it'd be packed out. I mean, you'd never get that now. In the UK, you're lucky if you get 300. I've had 500 speaking at one of my. I used to do international conferences out of home, but that was only limited through its capacity to about 350, and I'd have that regularly on the Saturday and Sunday. But there's no big really venues in the UK, and all the big UFO clubs and organizations have pretty much folded. There are no printed magazines now, which is sad. And when I left in 2013, I looked into creating a printed publication like the previous UFO magazine with Graham Birdsall, who'd sadly passed away in 2003. And the cost that I was being quoted, it would be like a specialist magazine. You've got to put your house up as collateral in case it fails. It's a very specialist audience. And a lot of the UFO magazine audience, because of the way it happened after he died, they've gone away, because I wasn't in a position in 2003 to do anything like that. It was only later on, 10 years later, in 2013, where I could even attempt to get a printed magazine. But literally the price then were too exorbitant. It was then just the era where e-zines were first being talked about. And I'd had a practice before with an e-zine that I did between 2004 and 2007, after Graham Birdsall died, called UFOmonthly.com. I mean, bear in mind, I didn't know how to do layouts or anything like that, but I kind of figured it out and got better as I went along, as you should do. And so by the time I realized you couldn't do it in printed form, I realized I was going to do it in PDF as an e-zine. I mean, e-zines are everywhere now, but they weren't so common in 2013. And but I realized it would work, and that people were happy to read things, especially as technology's gone along with tablets, iPads and things like that, and Kindles. People are happy to read off screens now, whereas at one time it was awful. to read off a big computer screen and scroll down. It took forever. So now it's just like turning a page. So you can do that now. And I realized that that time had changed. And so I went with that, and it's been successful ever since. So, I don't. I'm just a one-man band. I have a regular list of columnists, and I can reach out to all the top people in the world, and nearly everybody who's ever been anybody in the subject has written for the magazine over time, including people like Eric von Daniken and Robert Salas, Stanton Freeman had a column, Nick Redfern, all those kind of people at various times have had inputs. But I kind of don't want to be a massive breakthrough because I'd never get time to do anything. I'd be bogged down in admin. So as long as it keeps to a reasonable size, I don't want 1 million followers, put it that way, because I would never cope with the admin. And I don't really, at the age I am, want to be bogged down in having to become a CEO of a big organization. It's too much hassle, and I'm at a different stage of life. So for me, I just count myself very lucky that I can do something, and I get to do lectures around the world, and I've been to some weird and wonderful places, as I said earlier. So I count myself very lucky.
Yeah. Let's touch on. Sorry, you touched on disclosure. Let's dive into that. What do you think we're seeing in America at the moment? What do you think that's happening? And I know that you mentioned Louis Elizondo and some others who are suggesting that we are in this phase of disclosure at the moment. And for me personally, I kind of feel as if we've had some kind of soft disclosure for quite some time, but not enough for the everyday ordinary person to say, they're telling us that this is real and we need to believe it. And it's almost as if they're leaving kind of breadcrumbs. So at some point in the future, they can say, well, we did tell you because remember this and remember this. But I don't know. I've not kind of made my mind up about it. And I'm keen to know what your thoughts are on it, where it is now and where you think it's going.
I think where we are at the moment is in the most incredible place that I've ever seen in my life. Now, if you think that I had a sighting at 16 and I'm now 63, that's a long time, 47 years, and I've never seen the activity that's taking place now at the level that's taking place now, involving the people involved in this process. We've over the years, there's been, various Congress people and senators who've wanted and tried to get hearings. There has been hearings in the past in the 60s. But in the end, they were battling against a machine that was too powerful, the intelligence machine in the US, who controlled the subject for 75 years. And to find ourselves now, really, I think we are on the brink of a big disclosure moment. And what I mean by a big disclosure moment is you'll know when it happens because it'll be on every news channel, like the Hamas-Israel war, day in, day out, like COVID, day in, day out. That's when you know that you've made a world breakthrough. We're nowhere near that yet. 95% of the world still thinks it's crazy, or 90%. I think that the press are letting us down at the moment worldwide. They're dragging their heels. They are covering it more in the States, but in the UK, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, they're not really giving it any relevance. They'll do the odd little article, but nothing like it should be. In reality, we're in an extraordinary place because once those 3 videos came out, the Tic Tac, Go Fast and the Gimbal, they're the game changers. It's not the New York Times article, although that's strategically very important. It's those 3 videos, because for the first time, they were authenticated military videos. And for the first time, the press could go to a member of parliament and say, what is that? What is that? And they had something to look at that was bona fide, verified military footage. And so I think they're the big catalyst. Without the Nimitz Tic Tac scenario, which is an incredible case, and we're still learning more about it, we wouldn't be anywhere near we are now. But what's happened is from 2017, that opens the door. And when the videos are authenticated, that opens the door. And then, of course, you then see Congress mandating the intelligence community for the first time in 2021. We won a report. They get a report, and then 2022, there's whistleblower amendments made to allow whistleblowers to come forward. 2023, we now find ourselves, we've got suddenly out the woodwork, David Grush comes forward. And what a lot of people don't realize is just how good a witness David Grush is, because he was cleared up to presidential briefing level. He took the briefing files across the White House for the staffers to then go brief the president. So, I mean, absolutely, you can't be cleared any higher than that. So, you know, these people are trying to pour cold water on him. And this is where I say I'm not a big fan of the media. Even though I work with them all the time, I'm not a big fan, because they're letting us down, because they're not actually doing the job, which is investigative journalism. And they should be, because there should be all of this story like a rash now, because there's so much come out. So many people have said this. And literally, I thought 2022 was exciting, you know, with all the developments that were going on. But 2023, after a relatively quiet start, is now, we're into a strange time, because everything, literally every day, or every week, something is emerging that's of real interest. And so we're now in a stage where the legislation that passed last year has allowed a whistleblower to come forward, David Grush, who said he was tasked by the US UAP task force to look for legacy programs, and he found them. And then he gave 11 and a half hours testimony to the intelligence community inspector general. 11 and a half hours testimony. Well, again, you would not, on oath, he did this. If for any reason the inspector general had thought this guy's not credible, he'd been kicked out and he'd never even got a hearing with him. So the fact is that he is who he says he is. Nobody's knocked his credibility. Yes, there was an attempt to say, look, you know, you had some mental health issues, but why not when your best friend's just died, killed himself, and you've got PTSD? Yeah. You know, that was completely wrong. It was a low baller, but I think that has backfired because everybody's condemned them for the cheap, tacky tactic. So anyway, we now have this brilliant witness. We had in June, we had the hearing. July, we had the hearing, which was brilliant. Ryan Graves, Commander David Frog was superb. David Grush was superb. I mean, it's been crazy that it's taken until today, 26th of October, to get him in a skiff.
Yeah.
So he's allowed, well, he's not actually there, I don't believe. I think it's just the paperwork that he submitted to the Inspector General that basically said, these are the places, these are the people you want to be talking to. That's the program name, that's where it's located. And they're allowed to be viewing this material as we speak. So it'd be very interesting to see what comes from that. And we don't need, in terms of, we don't need to hear the classified details, the specifics. But if undoubtedly, when Luna and Congressman Tim Burchett come out of there, they're going to get plagued by people. Did you read stuff that corroborated David Grush's testimony in the classified environment? And they're bound to say yes, and they're going to have a chance to say, yeah, can't tell you what it is. Yeah, it corroborates everything he said. That's all they need to say. Now, that's not going to be good enough for the media, and it's not going to be good enough for the public, but it's going to be another step, because it's, you know, they're not going to then, in a sense, whilst they're not under an oath, I don't think, they're not going to damage their reputations by lying. There's no point in lying. The cat is out the bag, so it's only a matter of time. And the only thing that we're struggling with now is the kickback from the intelligence community and the inertia, the slow-moving media to really do its job, investigative journalism. Because if this was a political, and because UFOs until now have not been political, if this was another Watergate scenario, they'd be all over it like a rash. Every newspaper all over the world, there'd be intrigue and really digging into it, but they don't do it with UFOs, and they're still not. But time is fast approaching, because one of the things that people don't really realize, unless you're an avid follower of the subject, the general public, 95% of the public still think it's crazy land. You know, there might be something to it, but that's basically it. What we are on the brink, if the Chuck Schumer proposed legislation goes through, which in the next 2 months that will be. And yes, we know that the intelligence community are kicking back and trying to delay it, but I actually don't think you can stop the snowball running down the hill now. It's getting bigger and bigger because time is going on, and you just can't put the genie back in the bottle. I think the intelligence community and the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARRO, are there to represent the intelligence community who know disclosures coming, but they want to slow it down. And that's what I see ARRO doing. They want to deny it for as long as they can, obfuscate it, delay it in any way, that shape or form. But unfortunately, we've got some Congress people who are actually doing what they're paid to do, which is represent the people. And it doesn't usually happen like that with politicians. But, you know, Tim Burchett, he's probably, his politics is a million miles away from mine. But on this subject, he is the absolute star, battering ram, because he calls a spade, which you can't even say that anymore. But he does. He's a straight talking, God-fearing man. And I'm not religious, but he is. But he's a very straight guy. And he says he knows that there's a lie going on. And I think backed up by Luna, Congresswoman Luna, you know, we have not just one or two, we've got a handful of people who are really pushing it. On the senator side, we've got Senator Marco Rubio, who's made very positive comments. You know, so if that legislation passes and people like Danny Sheehan believe it will pass in its current form, Danny Sheehan, who was a legend in the, you know, he was the Watergate attorney kind of thing. So he's a well-established, genuine, credible guy. If that legislation passes, then we're almost in disclosure moment, on paper anyway. Because if people read that legislation, Chuck Schumer, who would never, ever made any official public utterance on UFOs until he suddenly came forward with this. And that was actually 10 days, I think, the 10th of July before July 26th hearing. So I think it was the 14th. So just 12 days before the congressional hearing with Grush, Favora and Graves, he came forward with this unprecedented legislation. Now, when you read it, there is no ambiguity. Now, I was used to in the police looking at the Criminal Damage Act, the Theft Act, anti-terrorism laws, and things like that. And it's legal jargon. Well, you can see that there's been a lot of thought about how that proposed legislation has been written. And the fact that it mentions over 20 times non-human intelligence, it goes into definitions of what this is, blah, blah, blah. It sets time limits for contractors where UFOs are being put out to reverse engineer. They've then got to do it and comply to the government within so many days. This is not something that's just haphazard. And I don't believe Chuck Schumer would have put his name to it in the way he did and introduced this legislation himself if he had not received advanced disclosure that he knew what was coming. It's obvious he knows what's coming. And if that legislation passes, I mean, it's already passed, but there's this debate about whether it will be watered down or whatever. But Danny Sheehan seems to think that it's going to pass as it is. And he's actually working in the background on creating the names for this 9-person panel that will be established as part of the Schumer legislation. And, you know, people just don't realize this. And the media are not really reporting on this. But we're going to be in this very strange situation, I fear, which is not a good situation, is that usually the NDAA Authorization Act, that usually gets signed off by the president by the end of 2023, like it did do for the end of 2022 and the end of 2021. If that gets passed and signed into law, the act is called the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. I mean, it's just, you can make this up. I mean, it's like science fiction. And if you're a UFO researcher, it's like every dream come true almost.
Yeah.
But still, the media are not over it like a rash, and they should be. But I think that when and if that happens, then, and I actually think a lot of things can happen in the next 8 weeks. A lot of things can happen that actually will draw us much closer to a disclosure moment. I think the press are on borrowed time. The world's media are on borrowed time, and they're going to have one hell of an explanation to try to satisfy everybody's curiosity when it finally does dawn. A lot of the press now, I think, are beginning to realise that they've been lied to for 75 years. Most media, newspapers and TV kind of hint at it. But unfortunately, because of the way the intelligence community in Arrow works, it's like they don't go after Sean Kirkpatrick at Arrow. Now, he's a public person representing a public body set up by Congress. They could say, well, hang on, talk to me about David Grush. Do you know David Grush? Well, apparently he's met him. David Grush has said I met him. So how can he not know that what David Grush was going to do? People knew about David Grush coming forward 18 months before he did in the intel world. So they knew what was coming. So for him to say, well, there's no evidence of ET, blah, 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 it completely goes against what the real people in the field are doing. And you know, I've just today I'd seen bits of it before, but I watched it all today. I watched the 2-part News Nation documentary on George Knapp, who I've met and you know, been in conversation with online, etc. And he reviewed my book very kindly, did a show with him. But it was a superb documentary, and it just highlights things that we've kind of hinted about for many decades. But literally everything that Grush then came forward is there. So if today is, and it could be an incredibly important day, because who knows what Senator Burchett may say, because he is a loose cannon for the intel community, which is terrible for the intel community, but brilliant for the UFO community. Because it's like he's a champion. You know, you can say whatever you want, you know, but you know, I think if he comes out and says there's nothing to see here, that would be a major shock to the UFO fraternity. But if he comes out and said, look, everything that David Grush said, I've seen documents that says name, who's running it, where things are, what's there. If he says that without revealing the actual specifics, then the press should be listening to that. So that's, you know, so today, we don't know what Luna's going to say. We don't the other officials that are in there. We don't know how many were there. It'll be interesting to know how many were in the skip. It's usually about 15, 20 people. So it'd be very interesting if there were 15, 20 other Congress people in there, because they're going to come out, and if they've been shown stuff or whatever. But I think the press should be going after Tim Burchett. I'm sure they will. I know that the likes of Jeremy Corbell will be, George Knapp, Ross Coulthart, people like that. People that are at the forefront of this, they're going to ask all the questions, and I've got a feeling that Tim Burchett, in particular, will call a spade a spade. Again, you can't say it, but I just did. But I don't think it's in his mentality to cover up and become a part of the cover up, because he knows that he's been lied to. He said it openly. Congress lies, blah, 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 blah. So it'd be very interesting to see what comes out of that. And we don't need to know the specifics, but if he endorses and says everything that Grush said was true, and I am shocked, or I am incredibly perturbed by what I found out, then again, it's adding pressure. But really, what should be happening, and it should have already happened, is that the press should be all over Sean Kirkpatrick, picking up on the contradictions. I mean, you had weaponized with Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, James Lukatsky, admitted that, yeah, we have a crashed UFO. Unequivocal. Yes, so actually, we've got inside the hull. Unequivocal. And this guy who ran the program, you know, was involved. So you've got all these kind of things happening. You've got the Schumer legislation coming up. We're told that there's going to be at least one more hearing before Christmas. Again, could be very crucial. Now, even things like they've appointed a new Speaker of the House, finally. This guy, I don't know him, but he's very religious. Apparently, Tim Burchett is a very good guy. So, but will he be open? He's very religious. Will he be open to getting a select committee that has subpoena powers, which is what we really want, because we want to force people to be on the stand. We want to force Sean Kirkpatrick to be at a hearing on the stand. We want to force people like the Inspector General Monheit to be on the stand and asked questions by members of Congress. That's where it needs to go. But the press need to be all over this. So there's so many twists and turns that could develop almost daily between now and the end of the year. But it's going to culminate, hopefully, with that Schumer legislation being passed. And if that happens, to all intents and purposes, you have got disclosure.
Yeah.
If that legislation passes in its current form, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean anything, because the world is not going to be convinced because of fake news, blah, blah, blah. That's the world we live in now. They're going to see proof. Now, I don't suppose anybody's going to bring out a spaceship or an alien body. That's not going to happen. But I think what's likely to happen is that these crystal clear videos, the 23-minute video that Luis Elizondo said there is out there of an object flying alongside the pilot within feet of his cockpit for 23 minutes in broad daylight, blue sky, blah, 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 cloudless sky. I think that needs to come out.
Yeah.
And that will start then convincing the media. And once the media get on board, it will be an avalanche. And I've said for a long time that the disclosure moment, the breakthrough moment, when it's on every news channel, it'll happen very quickly. So one day it's not there, and the next day it's wall to wall. And it will be, I've always likened it to like a dam. Some bricks come out in the middle of the dam, so the pressure grows on the center of the dam, and it gets more and more pressure, more bricks loosen, more pressure on the center of the dam, and eventually it'll reach critical mass, and then the dam collapses. That's disclosure day, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that is coming. And I don't see how we can go back. People go, well, it's just an intelligence. We're going down the same route as they're going to get the Condon Committee, the equivalent of it, and it'll be closed down. Big difference, social media. Yeah. Big difference, communications. The media cannot be controlled now. They can attempt to control it, but they can't. In the West, it's certainly in totalitarian countries like China and Russia, they can stop the internet, but they'll find ways around it because of tech people, a lot of tech savvy guys, people like that. But in the West, we know that we've been lied to. Somebody text the internet down. In the West, that's not going to happen. Yes, they can try. Imagine now, and I've said this publicly, that something behind the scenes that me and you in the public domain don't have a clue about is driving this process. I believe something has happened behind the scenes that none of us are aware of, but it's now driving this almost seemingly collision with reality, that we have to get this out there. And yes, the intelligence community know it's happening. They want to do it on their timescale, but that's not our timescale. And now, because of the Congress and the legislation, etc., it's getting forced upon them. So they're going to have to be in catch up, and they don't like it. The intelligence community are kicking and screaming not to reveal what they know. They really don't want to play a ball. Arrow is not for the public. It's a public relations exercise, much like Project Blue Book was a public relations exercise. But they do know it's coming. I do believe that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have admitted that spheres are going all around the world, traveling up to Mach 2, 1,322 miles an hour, can stop and fought against hurricane force 4 winds and things like that. That's anomalous. And again, it goes back to Sean Kirkpatrick. How can he say that and then say there's nothing anomalous? It's a contradiction in terms. But the press is letting him get away with it. But there is so much happening now that I have never, ever seen the momentum like it is now. Almost weekly. It's crazy. But once we get the Schumer legislation, and I think if we get another hearing where we can get people subpoenaed, and even if we couldn't, again, we can ask people like Mulhern to go on the stand. And if he doesn't, the press should be all over him. Why not? Sean Kilpatrick, why won't you? You've been appointed by a public office, by the Congress's request. You've been given money. You're a public representative. Why aren't you on the stand? Why won't you allow people to question you in an open forum? This is what the press should be doing.
Yeah,
they create the pressure, and that's what really should be happening and isn't happening. But all I can say is we are in unprecedented times, and everybody says it. And I, people, I think Luis Elizondo said, early to mid 2024, we might get disclosure in that big breakthrough moment. Well, I actually think it could be a lot quicker than that, because the momentum can build very, very quickly in a matter of days if the press start to avalanche. If the press really get hold of this and they start reporting on it, blah, 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 things will tumble very quickly, and the pressure on the dam will become intense, and then it will break, and then there'll be some kind of an announcement. Let's hope that things happen, but honestly, there has never been a more interesting time to be in the subject, and people are in for a shock, and that's why I get frustrated, because I and other people within the subject know that this is coming. It's inevitable that it's got to come. Too many things have happened. Too many important people have said things. Too many people are coming forward. I mean, we've had the Hill, is it Mark Remenkamp, say that there's over 40 first-hand witnesses who've gone on testimony for the Inspector General. David Grush said he led lots of people to the Inspector General. And then Monheim said, well, I haven't actually done anything. That didn't make sense. That's a contradiction. Although he did leave the word investigate out of his very carefully worded response. And like Jeremy Corbell was saying, he knows firsthand, George Knapp knows that there is an investigation going on by the Inspector General. So it's full of contradictions, but it's like a play on words. But we are in a kind of a disclosure war moment. And yes, some people will say, well, they'll forget all about it because of Israel and Hamas. That's a possibility. It could delay it, but it hasn't stopped them getting in a skiff today, albeit later than it should have. It should have been the first thing that had happened after the summer recess for Congress. As soon as they came back in early September, they should have had it. But hey, it doesn't matter. They're in there now. And what's going to be interesting is what comes out. But I think things could change dramatically and very quickly, dependent on what emerges over the next few weeks. I think by Christmas we're going to be very, very close.
Yeah, it's going to be a compelling few weeks, and I look forward to seeing what comes of today.
I think the world's in for a big shock if it happens, and they're not ready for it because the media have not prepared them. They are letting us down. They're the conduits. The politicians and the media they're the conduits for information on society, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, especially the media. And again, my work with ISA is creating educational programs, courses and things like that, because the world is very different from the 1938 Orson Welles and Mars and people running to the hills in the droves. That's not going to happen now. I think people can handle it now. However, I do think that a proportion, and I have no basis on this, but I'm estimating 15-20% of the public will feel, if disclosure happens, and we're talking about non-human intelligence, whether it be extraterrestrial, interdimensional, however you want to phrase it, something non-human is interacting with planet Earth, then a proportion of the public will be alarmed because they will feel vulnerable. It's going to be invasion. What happens to my kids? Blah, blah, blah. So, and I liken it to what happened during lockdown. We'd never had a lockdown before, but the ramifications of 2 lockdowns were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people worldwide who suffered mental health trauma by being isolated. Well, I kind of liken it to that. This is going to be unprecedented, and I think there will be an ontological shock that some people will find very difficult to deal with. The vast majority of the world, the other 80%, 85%. We'll still go to work. The world's not going to crash. The economies aren't going to crash. But it's just going to be a gamut of information. And the news media will finally kick in and do what they're supposed to have done several years ago, truly investigate. Because this information's really been around for a long time. There's been masses of evidence, and that only has to be borne out by the likes of Ross Coulthard, who knew nothing about the subject. But then suddenly he starts delving and thinks, "Oh, there's loads of stuff here." And this writes a great book and becomes a real champion for the subject. So it's like that until you actually dip your toes in the water. I don't know what your background is. Most people are led to believe there's nothing to it. But if you actually read the best evidence from the likes of pilots, commercial military, air traffic controllers, military personnel, the sonar operators, radar operators, there's fantastic accounts going back to the 1940s. So it's always been obvious to me that there was something going on. Plus, I'd seen something that I couldn't explain, that you couldn't put down to a normal explanation. So I kind of just accepted there was something out there, and it changed my outlook. So going back to the original question is, it didn't affect me at the time in a way that I could readily realize, but it became the catalyst for what was to emerge. It's like I was a sleeper agent, and then suddenly, right, you're in your 30s, wake up, you've got a job to do. It feels like, I know, and I talked to other researchers who have a similar opinion, that they feel compelled to have done what they've done to become public, and there's a lot of parallels, and I've always felt that something kicked off in me quite out of the blue, but it was that original sighting, and that must have been the catalyst. And then it's at a certain point, it's like, you've got a job to do now.
Yeah,
it sounds weird, but people talk about synchronicity in this subject, and it was a word I'd never heard of until I got into this field. And a lot of people say it's coincidence. Well, I've had so many strange coincidences that it's beyond coincidence. So I now readily accept that there is synchronicity. It's like you were meant to be. It was meant, your role was meant to be. And I think we're all doing that. Maybe what you're doing now, you feel compelled to do what you're doing, and other people feel very similar stories to mine. And it's like somebody says, yeah, you're activated now, off you go. Yeah. And yet I've never had any direct, as far as I'm aware, no direct kind of contact moment or anything like that. I've never seen a spaceship. That can definitively say it was a spaceship. You see what I mean? I've had sightings, but nothing that close or anything like that. But implicitly, as a detective, when you're talking to other police officers, detectives, and they're telling you, especially when it's multiple witness, the same story, it's obvious that there's something going on and that the public have been lied to. And when you look into the Robertson panel and you realize that it was a deliberate stigma program to debunk the subject, you realize where the stigma comes from. So most people are not aware of this. So once you start delving, there is so much to this subject. And I kind of always dreamed that in my lifetime, there would be disclosure, what we call disclosure with a big D. It's on every news channel every day, kind of thing. Well, and sometimes you think that's never going to happen. And lots of people have died, and researchers, famous researchers have died, never got to see it. Stanton Friedman was a friend of mine. He's not got to see it. But I honestly think, I just don't see how we can put this back in the bottle with everything that comes out and everything that's emerging, the witnesses that are coming forward, the important people who are about to give testimony or have given testimony. I literally can't see any other conclusion that there's going to be disclosure. It's just a question of when. And I think that most people are expecting it within the next year, 2 years maximum. I tend to think things could happen a lot quicker if certain things happen.
Yeah. Gary, what's a lot of people on my platform? I'm mainly on Instagram, and obviously put bits out on Spotify in terms of podcasting, just because it's a better format, it's a longer form format, and it's quite difficult on Instagram for that. But because of the platform of Instagram, it's a very short and sweet, and 1-2 minute kind of cuts, and I think it gets a much younger demographic. And I'm finding that a lot of people are very new to this, and they come into this with a mindset that this started in 2017, and you know, and the David Grush stuff is sorry, the David Fravor, you know, sightings and the Tic Tac and the gimbal, and the Go Fast are very much the first kind of big things, and you know, as you know, full well that this goes back a hell of a long time. What would you say? I'm interested in your take on what would be a really compelling case for somebody just to have a look at, you know, from before 2017. What would be a good case for them to dig into? Do you think that was really compelling to you?
You've got outstanding cases. A really good case. I love pilot cases, military pilot cases. And I would say the Tehran incident from 1976 with Parviz Jafari as the pilot. It is an incredible tale. And basically, over Tehran, air traffic control basically picked up an object that was seen visually by the air traffic control tower, including a general, who then said, so you've already got a confirmation of aided vision corroboration. Radar scrambles an F4 Phantom, and the F4 Phantom, as it starts to close in on the object, suddenly all its instruments start to fail, as if it's been jammed in somewhere, and literally it has to stop the pursuit and goes back to base. As soon as it turns around, all its instrumentation comes back on, by the way. But it's called off. And then a second pilot, which is pilot Parviz Jafari, who went on to become a general, lieutenant at the time, he takes off and he's chasing it. He sees it's like a diamond-shaped object with 4 repeating pulsing lights. And as he's chasing it, closing it, suddenly a red object almost is fired. As a small red object emerges from the larger object and is fired straight on a collision course with his aircraft. It's that fast, and apparently he goes for his machine guns. His machine guns jammed, incredibly. What a coincidence. And he actually thinks he's going to die because it's that fast and on a collision course. And he kind of like does that, and then it's gone down the side, and then it goes around the back of his plane, and then goes back to the diamond-shaped object that he's still chasing, can't get near, and it just seamlessly merges into the diamond. Then as he's pursuing it, he sees a green light suddenly drop vertically towards the ground, and it's so bright it's like daylight as it's going down to the ground, and he thinks that's another object landed. And basically after that, the main object then just shoots away, changes gear, and it's gone. He can't get anywhere near it. Goes back next day to the area in daylight, nothing ever landed. But it's an incredible sighting that was fully written up by a DIA report, Defense Intelligence Agency, and he himself later on in life went public. He's done various documentaries, UFO documentaries, so he's given his testimony. Fantastic case. How do you justify that? You've got jamming, active jamming, which is not supposed to happen, which is effectively it's almost a war crime. You know, that's tantamount to war, active jamming. And basically, you've got corroboration on radar, airborne and ground radar. You've got several objects emerging from the primary object. You've got, as I say, the jamming. It's just a fantastic pursuit case, and there are many other famous cases like that. There are commercial pilots and whatever. There are sonar cases. There are so many air traffic control cases. They're incredible cases, but that's one that's really well known and someone of his ilk. And I refer to it because he was general. There's another guy, another military pilot called Colonel Oscar Santa Maria, who I met at the citizens' hearings in 2013. And he was a Peruvian military pilot. And in broad daylight, he's vectored towards an object that had been seen on radar. And he's vectored towards it. And he at first, he thinks it's a balloon, and he's ordered to fire at it. So he fires his high caliber machine gun, I think it was 36mm bullets at it, no effect, and then the object suddenly goes straight up about 10,000 feet, which he can't do. So he's got to put his afterburner on. He goes chasing after it, and it goes and he's kind of playing cat and mouse with it. until it was beyond his height altitude, so he couldn't pursue it anymore. So you've got these kind of cases that people have gone on record. They're just outstanding, and they're in a sense simple to read through. Obviously, I've become well known for my work with Rendlesham Forest, but Rendlesham Forest is not just a simple case. It's arguably the most complicated UFO case in history, with hundreds of moving parts, multiple days of contact. It says in the book 18, but it's 17 now, because one of the 18 has, since the publication of the book, has said it actually happened in December 79, which raises other questions. But the testimony was still fine, but it happened early. So in the conclusion of book Non-Human, the Rendlesham Forest UFO Incidents, plural, 42 years of denial, I highlight that there are 17 different timed UFO UAP related incidents, and not one of them can be explained in any terrestrial form, i.e. plane, helicopter, and glider, whatever. There's nothing. And we're talking spheres, triangles, sometimes small, sometimes big spheres. You've got triangles. You've got all manner of stuff flying around, interacting with various military personnel in the main, although some civilians saw stuff peripherally because they live nearby. But concentrating on the military side. Now, people have offered explanations like it was a lighthouse. It was never a lighthouse. Ridiculous. 17 different events, often going away, often on the bases. One of the witnesses that I spoke to, that's in the book, is a first-hand witness. We're a lot about first-hand witnesses being needed because of David Grush's testimony. Well, he's a first-hand witness to say that he's inside the nuclear weapons storage area when he sees the UFO shine a beam down into the nuclear storage bunkers. We'd had rumours before. Now we've got a witness, a guy called Steve Longero, and he says it then did like put a beam down and did like a grid-like search of the whole of the hot roll, which is about 300 meters long. So it was as if it was looking for something, and the objects, and it was a nuclear base. I found a document that said it was a nuclear base. Since I've interviewed for the book 6 people who've said that, military witnesses who said, yeah, it was regarding tactical nuclear weapons. I did the same job for 3 of my 6 years in the Royal Air Force as a corporal in the Air Force, in the RAF Police. And I did exactly the same job at 2 nuclear bases. So that's what we would do. We were guarding tactical nuclear weapons. It's a very serious job. And they did exactly the same. But I'm quoting cases like pilot cases because they're actually simpler because they're, in a sense, a one-off sighting. Rendlesham is anything but. It's 17 different events. So it's so you can't just sum it up in a couple of minutes. It's very complicated, but essentially there are thousands of high quality cases. So I looked at military pilot reports and things like that, commercial pilot reports, often corroborated by numerous other pilots who, you know, you can have planes going from London to New York and they're passing each other and they see something from different perspectives and they corroborate each other. And it's on ground radar, ground and airborne radar, that kind of thing. You've got literally, I think, about 4,000 pilots worldwide have gone on the record today. And it's the tip of an iceberg. And, you know, I talked to Ryan Graves, people like that, and he's created, you know, American safe aerospace. You've got literally, I think, thousands more worldwide will come forward as soon as there is a major disclosure. It's going to be an avalanche, but in all walks of life. And, you know, I think there are thousands of military people you know, who around the world who've probably had contact. You know, I know people, very eminent researchers who've had the contact experience. They've interacted with something throughout their lives, and so a lot of people won't be able to get their head around that. So let's just concentrate on, in a sense, getting the facts out there and these cases out there, like the Tic Tac, which is a brilliant case. And, you know, that's a fantastic case to quote somebody, very relevant, because, you know, immediately we've got video, authenticated military video of an object that seems to break the radar track and then shoot off at speed as described by the pilots involved. Commander David Trevor when he's at the who's really in all but name, and I'm sure he'll enjoy this. He's the Tom Cruise of the UFO world because he really was the Top Gun pilot. You know, he was the instructor kind of thing. He was the you know, top guy. And so when he said at that hearing, that congressional hearing in July, you know, this is decades ahead of us in technology, and it ain't Russian and it ain't Chinese. So we should be listening to people like that. That would be my answer. Look at pilot cases; they're my favorite.
Yeah, you don't get much more credible than David Fravor, do you?
No, absolutely, and he was exceptional at the hearing. They all were, but he was exceptional because he went a little bit further, probably than Ryan, and gave an opinion basically, and it was clear that nobody wanted to mention the word extraterrestrial or alien. They didn't want to put off an audience who may be looking in, but he made it absolutely clear that whatever it was so far technologically in front of anything on this earth that it kind of leaves only one conclusion.
Yeah. Gary, I've taken up enough of your time here. I really appreciate you talking to me. Is there anything that you're sort of working on at the moment, or that would be useful for my listeners to know about with regards to anything you're working on?
I'm really busy. I'm actually going out to San Marino for a conference where I've been several times before, and I'll be there in my Vice President of ISA capacity. But actually, I can reveal that there's going to be an interview with David Grush that's been recorded specially for the conference in San Marino. I've not seen it yet, but I think it's a 30-minute interview with him has been done by the president of ISA, Roberto Panotti. And so that'll get shown there. A couple of weeks, and then going off to the Czech Republic for a lecture, which is good. I'm working on the magazine, just hard working at it now because it's every 2 months. So this is the September, October edition will be out by the end of the month. I'm beginning to looking at my police book that I put on hold 5 years ago when I began the reinvestigation of Rendlesham, little realizing that it would take all this time and 3 years to write. So it's been on hold for 5 years. So I kind of want to go back to that and get that out now. And now I've written one book. Hopefully I'll be able to write more. I love writing and I'm so passionate about this subject. There's lots of things, you know, I'm still developing courses for ISA. And I think that the relevance of ISA, we haven't really talked about it, but this element of educating people about the past, because you've been lied to, is so important in desensitizing and taking the fear away of the subject. Because if we go into a disclosure world, we're not talking about nationalities anymore. We have to start thinking of the human race, which is only one human race. And it goes back to the Reagan issue at the United Nations. What if we were threatened by an outside force? Would we all come together as one? And I think we would. Well, not that we're in an invasion scenario, but I think that the world post-disclosure, which is coming, whether it's now, a year, 2 years, I do think we're in the final stages leading up to that breakthrough moment. When that happens, people are going to need to learn about the history because it's been denied to them. And I think that's why ISA will become increasingly more relevant. And the relevancy is we need to talk as the human race. We need to have total discussions of all countries addressing it in a global way, like UN, that kind of style. It's not for one country to dominate. It's all countries should realize that we're dealing with something that's bigger than mankind, which is very difficult for most people to accept, especially if you're a big, powerful politician or maybe an oil baron or whatever. You might not like all that because it might threaten your profits and whatever. I fully understand that. But in reality, if a non-human intelligence is not acknowledged worldwide in the preceding future, then we are going to have to rewrite the history of the last 75 years, if not many thousands of years, because they may tell us if there is contact going on. Yeah, we built the pyramids. Who knows? But it's an exciting time. So yeah, I'm really busy. I'm hoping to do some more things that I can't talk about at the moment. So there are other irons in the fire, which hopefully will be revealed in due course. But it's a really busy time, and honestly, it's an exceptional time that I can never recall in my lifetime.
Yeah. Well, what a lovely way to end it. Thanks so much. I mean, I really appreciate you and everything that you've done for the subject, and I'm glad that you're there doing it, and that you've not actually retired.
I never, when I began this, I never set out to preach to people. I just wanted to reach the man on the street and say, actually, you are being lied to, and you're not getting the full facts. That's all I ever try to do, is reach the man on the street. And my wish before I die is that happens, and that everybody knows that there is a story here, a real story.
Okay, lovely. Thanks so much for your time, Gary. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope we get to speak again soon in the future.
Anytime. And it's an exciting time. So if things emerge, come back to me. We'll have a chat about what's emerging.
Take care. Thanks very much, Gary.
Thanks, Jim.
Cheers.